The billionaire took his new girlfriend for a checkup, then froze as his pregnant ex-wife walked in. Welcome back, beautiful souls. You're watching Alcott Stories, where emotions have a voice and every tale leaves a mark. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight's story, it's not just about love. It's about betrayal, choices, second chances, and a woman who didn't just survive heartbreak, she rewrote her destiny. What happens when a billionaire takes his new girlfriend to the hospital, but finds his pregnant ex in the delivery room, holding not one, but two of his children? Yeah, you're going to want to stay till the end. But before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing our Alcott family from every corner of the globe. All right, buckle up. This one's raw, real, and powerful. Let's begin. The hum of the jet engines purred like a lullaby beneath the private Gulf Stream. G700 as it sliced through the skies toward Los Angeles. Sunlight draping the clouds like silk. Ethan Blake, 32, billionaire tech mogul and the man Fortune magazine had once labeled the coldest dealmaker in Silicon Valley, leaned back into the supple leather seat, fingers lightly scrolling through documents on his tablet. With a precision that betrayed a mind built like a machine, his steel blue eyes were tired but sharp, scanning numbers and forecasts like a surgeon studies X-rays, dissecting weakness, opportunity, and power in a single blink. Money surrounded him, the $12,000 wristwatch, the tailored black Armani suit, the polished leather, a briefcase with embossed initials. But it never made him feel full. Power thrilled him. Control grounded him. Emotion, that was luxury he couldn't afford. But something shifted when she appeared. Her voice, gentle and clear like mountain water, snapped him out of the metrics and margins. "Would you care for something to drink, sir?" He looked up and time did something strange. It didn't stop, but it paused just long enough to make him notice. Standing there was a woman unlike anyone in his carefully curated world. Zara Khan, her name neatly printed on a gold nameplate, was a vision wrapped in elegance and confidence. She moved with the precision of a trained professional, but the grace of someone who owned her space. Her skin glowed with a warm bronze hue that reminded him of sunlit caramel, and her thick black hair was tied into a loose, elegant twist, with a few rebellious strands cascading past her cheekbones like dark silk. Her eyes met his, not timid, but steady, and something in her gaze unsettled him. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw a man. He wasn't used to that. As she leaned slightly to offer him a glass of water, the plane hit unexpected turbulence. The world tilted. The crystal-clear glass jolted from her fingers and water splashed down Ethan's chest and coat like a silent slap. Gasps came from the crew cabin, but not from him. Silence filled the space as she stood frozen in horror. "I'm so sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice cracking at the edges. Her hands trembled slightly, reaching for a napkin she didn't have. But Ethan didn't shout, didn't scowl. He looked down at his drenched shirt, let out a slow breath, and then did the unthinkable. He chuckled. "Well," he said with a sly grin tugging at the corner of his lips, "I did need to test my dry cleaning service anyway." Zara blinked, clearly expecting anger. Instead, she met warmth, or at least something adjacent to it. Relief flooded her face. "Let me help you," she said quickly. "There's a changing room just behind the lounge area." Without waiting for approval, she led him down the narrow aisle. Her perfume, something faintly floral with a hint of spice, trailing behind like a whisper. In the private lounge, the tension shifted again. Not thick, not inappropriate, but charged. The kind of silence that isn't. Empty, but full of something neither can name yet. She handed him a pressed white shirt from the emergency guest wardrobe, then turned, expecting him to handle it himself. But he fumbled, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to break the moment. "Would you?" he asked softly. Her hands hesitated at first, then reached out. Fingers brushed over his shoulder as she slipped off the wet coat, peeled away the soaked shirt. She kept her eyes professional, but her breath hitched when she noticed the tattoo on his ribcage. A Latin phrase that read, "Aurum est potestas." Gold is power. His body was lean, toned, marked by scars from a younger. Walter passed that money hadn't erased. "You don't seem like the type to be patient," she said, her voice lower now, like a thought escaping before she could catch it. "You don't seem like the type to be just a flight attendant," he returned, matching her tone, watching her eyes for a flicker of reaction. There was one, small but present, a quirk of her lips, a brief raise of the brow. "Touché," she said, buttoning the last clasp. The air between them grew heavier, but not with discomfort, with curiosity, with unspoken invitations. She turned to leave, professionalism slowly rebuilding her posture. "Thank you," he said, unusually sincere. She paused at the door, hand resting lightly on the frame, her back half turned. "Next time," she said, "I'll offer champagne." He gave a small nod, hiding the rare trace of a smile. As the door closed softly behind her, Ethan stood in the changing room, dry shirt in place, heart strangely alert. His carefully managed inner world stirred for the first time in years, and all because of a glass of water, a pair of honest eyes, and a woman who didn't flinch at his fortune. Not even once. The plane landed in Los Angeles, but something in Ethan didn't. As the wheels kissed the runway and the cabin lights flickered to life, his mind wasn't on the meeting he was scheduled to attend, or the multi-million-dollar deal waiting in downtown. It was on her. He stared out the window with the same cool expression he'd worn for years. But beneath that, something unfamiliar hummed. Curiosity, attraction, perhaps even vulnerability. That night, alone in his penthouse suite overlooking the city, he did something he hadn't done in years, without strategy. He picked up his phone and typed, "Did your passengers make it home safe?" He stared at the screen longer than necessary before hitting send. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then 3. Finally the screen lit up. Only one still lingers in my head. It was witty, subtle, and bold, and it disarmed him more than he expected. The messages continued over the next few days. Slow at first. Casual questions, playful teases, but soon they became more. They spoke about music, childhood memories, fears they never admitted aloud, books neither of them had time to read, but wanted to. And it wasn't just the words. It was the feeling between them. The kind that grows in the quiet space where two people actually see each other. Their first meeting after the flight happened in the corner of a quiet downtown cafe where no one knew his name or her face. She wore a simple beige shawl and laughed like no one was watching. And Ethan, the man who once judged women by their heels and handbags, found himself drawn to the delicate way she stirred her coffee. He didn't touch her hand that day, but his eyes lingered. The second meeting happened at a rooftop bar, dimly lit, with jazz in the background and shadows dancing across her cheekbones. There, over a shared glass of wine, his hand brushed hers, deliberate, warm, unsure. She didn't pull away, and neither did the silence between them. Soon it became ritual. Twice a week, she'd meet him at the Rosewood Hotel, always slipping in through the side entrance with her hair tucked under a scarf, her smile betraying excitement and fear. Behind those heavy, sweet doors, the world slowed down. He'd greet her with a look that softened only for her. She'd remove her shoes, sink into the plush carpet like it was the first comfort. She allowed herself all week and talk about things that mattered. Her brother's student visa, the pressure to send money home, the feeling of being invisible in a room full of first-class passengers. And Ethan for once listened, really listened. He told her about his mother, the one who left, not the one the magazines wrote about. He told her about growing up in a house with walls so tall it felt like a museum, not a home. Their fingers would find each other during these conversations, as if affirming that the emotions were real, that neither of them was dreaming. The intimacy wasn't rushed. When it came, it was slow, exploratory, not just of bodies, but of trust. The way she kissed him was not like a woman seducing wealth, but a woman who needed reassurance that she wasn't just a chapter in his story. They made love with the lights dimmed low, not to hide, but to focus on breath, on warmth, on the quiet rhythm of two people daring to care in a world that discouraged it. Afterward, they'd lay tangled in sheets and secrets, her head on his chest, his hand tracing gentle lines on her back. "This won't last," she whispered once, her voice barely audible. "We're too different." He didn't reply with words. He only held her tighter. But outside that room, the truth waited. The world they came from, his of sharp suits and silent drivers, hers of scraped knees and budget meals, kept knocking at the door. He never introduced her to his circle, never mentioned her name at business dinners, and Zara never asked. But sometimes she'd stare at him while he slept, wondering if she was just filling a void until something easier or more convenient came along. Still she returned, not because she was naive, but because she believed in the magic they built between check-ins and check-outs. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for a woman who had spent her life being overlooked, being seen even in the shadows felt like the brightest light. The illusion unraveled not with a storm, but with a whisper. It began on a rainy Tuesday morning, the kind where clouds pressed low against the city like a secret waiting to be told. Zara sat alone on the edge of her bed, a pregnancy test trembling in her fingers, the word positive screaming at her in silence. Her heart raced, but not with excitement, with fear, with disbelief, with a thin sliver of naive hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment Ethan would prove he wasn't like the world she had grown up. Bracing herself against. That night she typed the message slowly, deliberately, rereading it a dozen times before hitting send. "We need to talk. It's important." He didn't reply until the next day, casually, almost distracted. "Is something wrong?" She hesitated, then wrote the words she couldn't unsay. "I'm pregnant." The screen stayed still. No three dots, no response, nothing. Hours turned to days. She checked her phone obsessively, each minute that passed, stretching the silence into something sharp and cruel. And when his reply finally came, it didn't arrive with comfort or clarity. It arrived like a knife. "This isn't part of the plan." Just 6 words, cold, mechanical, detached. She stared at the message, blinking, as if the meaning might shift if she read it enough times. But it didn't. Her thumbs hovered over the screen before she finally replied, "They're not a plan. They're our children." His answer came quicker this time, as if the decision had already been made long before she told him. "I can wire you enough to make this easier. You don't have to do this." Her mouth went dry. She read it again and again, each word dimming something in her, not just her hope, but the version of Ethan she thought she knew. The man who listened to her dreams beneath the hotel ceiling fan, who touched her face like it was made of glass, who held her like he needed her. Where was he now? Replaced by a man of contracts and control, who treated life like an inconvenience and love like a liability. She didn't cry, not yet. She stood, walked to the window, and looked at the city as the rain pressed quietly against the glass. She thought about the nights they'd shared, the promises that were never spoken but deeply felt, the way his heartbeat had sounded in the dark. And then she thought about the tiny heart now beating inside her. 2 of them, she'd soon learn. And they deserved better than silence and shame. The next morning she sent him a final message. "I don't need your money. I won't need your name. Just stay out of our lives." And then she blocked him, deleted his number, packed her small suitcase with trembling hands, and boarded a train. Back to her hometown, not because it was easier, but because it was hers. The city greeted her not with glamour, but with memory. Narrow streets, chipped pavement, the smell of rain-soaked cement, and a mother who embraced her without question. Zara stood at the threshold of her old room, now cluttered with dusty books and old blankets, and for the first time in days allowed herself to weep. Not just for Ethan, but for the version of herself that had believed in a fairy tale ending. As the months passed, her belly grew and so did her strength. She took part-time work at a local library, kept herself busy, stayed away from gossip, and slowly stitched herself back together. People stared. They whispered. But she held her head high, not because she wasn't broken, but because she refused to stay that way. Every kick, every flutter inside her reminded her of purpose, not loss. She read parenting books late into the night, decorated a small corner of the room with thrifted baby clothes, and whispered lullabies to the space between heartbeats. She never said his name again, not to anyone, not even to herself. What they had was real and for a time. But what came after was more important, the quiet rise of a woman who had been shattered but chose to rebuild. Not for him, not even for revenge, but for the two tiny souls growing inside her and the dignity that would shape the legacy she intended to give them. 6 months had passed like a lifetime Ethan never counted, and yet here he was, strolling through the pristine marble corridors of Westbury. Elite medical center like nothing in his past could catch up to him. His hand rested lightly on the waist of Ava Monroe, a 23-year-old socialite with flawless porcelain skin, a cascading laugh, and a pedigree that made her welcome in every room he once had to buy his way into. She wore designer everything, from her heels to her soft pink lipstick, and smiled like the world had never betrayed her. To the outside world, Ethan Blake looked whole again, billionaire, polished, detached, a man who had moved on, moved up, moved away. But fate, like memory, does not dissolve so easily. As they reached the concierge desk, Ava giggled about something trivial. Skincare, brunch, her Pilates instructor. Ethan didn't hear a word. His gaze was pulled down the corridor where a nurse brushed past in a blur, her arms full with 2 tiny, swaddled newborns, wrapped in cream and lavender blankets. He would have looked away, returned to his curated reality. But then he saw her, Zara. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in this hospital, not in this city, not now. She stood just outside a patient room, leaning slightly against the doorframe, her figure draped in a modest navy gown. Her hair was pulled back loosely, dark strands escaping down her temples. Her eyes, those deep, warm eyes, lifted at the exact moment his froze. Time halted, cruelly and intimately, like the universe had been holding its breath just to watch this. Their eyes met, and in that instant everything he'd buried clawed back to life. She looked different, older perhaps, not in years but in weight, in truth. Her arms cradled one twin while the nurse gently settled, the second against her shoulder. There was no partner beside her. No ring, no help, just strength. Quiet, undeniable, unflinching strength. Her skin glowed with the sheen of motherhood. Exhaustion etched into her expression. Yes, but also something more defiant. Ethan's throat tightened. His hand slipped from Ava's waist unconsciously, a chill threading up his spine. Ava, still oblivious, scrolled through her phone, humming to herself. Zara didn't blink. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him. Not as the man who once whispered her name like a secret, but as the man who chose silence when she needed a voice. In her eyes, he saw the questions she'd never asked and the answers he never had the courage to give. For a second, he thought to walk toward her, say something, anything, but his feet remained rooted. Because what do you say to the woman you left behind with your legacy in her arms? The weight of his choices pressed harder than the $1,000 coat on his shoulders, and for the first time in months, his world, the one built on deals, masks and distractions, cracked. A nurse called Ava's name. She glanced up, grabbing Ethan's hand again, and he followed her in, like a man obeying the motions of someone else's life. But just before he disappeared around the corner, he turned his head back, one last time. Zara was still there, watching, not with bitterness, not with desperation, but with a silent message carved into the lines of her tired smile. You made your choice, and I made mine. Then gently she turned away, walking down the hall with her babies held close, leaving Ethan with the sound of 2 tiny heartbeats echoing through the sterile air, the only truth that had ever really mattered. The door closed behind Ava with a soft click, but Ethan stood outside it, still stunned, staring down the hallway where Zara had disappeared minutes earlier with his children. His children. His chest felt like it was caving in. He turned sharply, eyes scanning for someone, anyone, until he caught the arm of a passing nurse, startling her. I need records, he said, voice barely controlled. Maternity. Room Boost 9, name, Zara Khan. The nurse hesitated, frowning. Sir, that's confidential. I'm the father, he snapped. I need to know. She studied him, uncertain. But something in his face, desperation laced with guilt, softened her resistance. She returned a few moments later, eyes downcast, holding a small printed page. 2 names, 2 times of birth. Father's name, blank. Ethan's throat tightened. The paper shook in his hand like a verdict. And in that sterile moment, surrounded by polished walls and muted beeping machines, the truth he'd chosen to ignore months ago stood in front of him, undeniable. Breathing, crying in swaddled cloth, his world, built on silence and self-preservation, cracked. Ethan found himself walking, fast, then slow, toward the neonatal wing. And there she was, Zara, in the quiet corner of the recovery lounge, cradling one baby, while a nurse adjusted the other's blanket in the nearby crib. Her profile was calm, lips parted as she hummed something soft. When she saw him, her shoulders straightened, but she didn't flinch. He approached carefully, as if any loud word might break the air between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, it was wounded. She didn't look up at first, just rocked gently. Then finally she lifted her gaze, not hostile, just tired. "I did," she replied, her voice steady. "You chose not to hear me." Ethan blinked, the weight of her words hitting harder than any slap could. He stepped forward, hand half raised. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." Zara gave a faint, bitter laugh. "So you chose nothing. You disappeared. And I did everything." The baby stirred in her arms, and she held the infant closer, more for herself than the child. "Let me help now," Ethan offered. "Money, anything. A place, co-parenting, whatever you need." She looked him straight in the eye, and for a moment, Ethan saw all the nights she cried without him, the doctor's visits she faced alone, the baby kicks he never felt, the contractions he never counted. "I needed you then," she whispered. "Now, I just need peace." He opened his mouth. But there was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like excuse. She stood, slowly, the grace in her posture far grander than her simple clothes. She turned away. Not out of hate, but out of resolve. And that somehow cut deeper. Meanwhile, Ava had returned to the waiting lounge, confused by his absence. She walked down the hall and stopped cold when she saw him, Ethan, standing silent in front of a crib, one hand resting on the edge like it was sacred. Zara, close by, adjusting a bottle with a tired familiarity. 2 infants. A family without her. She didn't need an explanation. She didn't need to ask questions. Still, her voice came out sharper than she intended. "You still love her, don't you?" Ethan didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. The silence that followed wasn't blank. It was full of regret, of history, of everything he'd lost when he chose comfort over courage. And that silence, more than anything he could have said, answered her. Ava's expression hardened. She stepped back. No screams, no theatrics, just a subtle nod, the kind that ends chapters. Ethan stood alone again, watching the woman who once begged for his presence walk away with the only parts of him that ever truly mattered. And he finally realized what power really meant. It wasn't money. It wasn't control. It was staying when staying was hardest. And he hadn't. The sterile silence of the hospital hallway echoed long after. Zara's footsteps faded and Ava's heels clicked away, but Ethan Blake remained still, hands in his pockets. A man finally stripped of illusion. No empire, no private jet, no boardroom dominance could prepare him for the sting of knowing he'd become a footnote in the story of his own children. The next morning, he returned to the hospital, not in designer suits or polished ego, but with a quiet determination and a box of soft blankets, preemie diapers, and the specific organic formula the nurse had mentioned offhand the day before. He didn't ask to see Zara. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply walked in, left the supplies at the nurse's station with a scribbled note, "If they need more, just say the word," and left. He returned the next day, and the next, until eventually the staff stopped asking who he was. Slowly, clumsily, he began asking questions. How to change a diaper, how to warm a bottle, how to hold a newborn so their neck doesn't strain. He practiced with a doll in the nursery simulation room, arms shaking, forehead furrowed like he was solving the world's most delicate equation. Zara watched from a distance, often through the glass partition, her expression unreadable. She wasn't moved by flowers or charity. She wanted to see change, real change. Not the billionaire Ethan, but the man who could kneel on a hospital floor at 3 a.m. and rock. A crying child until sleep returned. Meanwhile, Ava didn't shout. She didn't beg. She simply packed her things, her silence louder than thunder. The day she left, she looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not your escape. Ethan, I deserve a life where I'm the first choice, not a detour from your regret." Her chin didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't water. She walked out with her spine straight and her dignity intact, a woman rewritten, not ruined. Zara's best friend, a bold nurse named Liana with red braids and a fearless mouth, sat beside her one night during feeding and said, "You don't have to take him back." Zadid, but those kids, they deserve to see effort even if it fails. That night, Zara texted Ethan one sentence, "Be at room 4:02 at 8 a.m. If you're late, don't come back." He showed up at 7:45, breathless, holding a box of freshly washed onesies. For the next few weeks, Ethan didn't try to romance his way in. He joined a parenting support group, where single dads and struggling couples shared fears he'd never voiced aloud. He volunteered at a local family shelter on weekends, not because it made headlines, but because Folding donated. Baby clothes in silence gave him a kind of peace he didn't know he needed. Then, without PR approval, without corporate spin, he gave an interview with a local parenting magazine. He didn't name Zara directly, but he said this: "The mother of my children taught me more about courage than any CEO I've ever met. She raised twins alone. She deserves the world, even if I was too foolish to offer it when it mattered." The quote went viral. Sympathy poured in. Praise followed, but Zara stayed quiet, because she didn't want a man who could talk. She wanted a man who could listen. Growth wasn't a press release. It was the consistency of presence. The night she saw him fall asleep, upright, in a hospital chair with one twin cradled in his lap and the other snuggled on his chest, she felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like recognition. That maybe the man who broke her wasn't the same as the man trying to rebuild himself now. Still, she whispered to herself, effort isn't love. It's just the start. And that's all she allowed it to be. The weeks turned to months, and Zara didn't wait for Ethan's redemption to complete her life. She built it herself. She applied for a ground position and soon became a certified flight safety trainer, swapping the aisle of the aircraft for classrooms, filled with aspiring attendants who listened to her with respect, not condescension. Her days were long but full. Diaper changes, night feeds, lesson plans, and brief, quiet moments where she'd steal a breath while her twins napped beside her. She moved into a small but warm apartment just outside the city. Walls painted soft lavender, baby clothes folded in drawers. She assembled herself. She didn't want handouts. She wanted ownership. The twins thrived under her care, their laughter echoing through every room like proof that healing was possible. Ethan was there, at doctor's appointments, early morning pickups, and the occasional birthday planning meeting, but always at a distance. He'd learned not to force presence but to earn it. And when he saw Zara walking the boys into daycare with a steady smile and no hesitation, he realized she was not the same woman who once waited for his text. She was grounded, complete, and not because of him, but despite him. One afternoon, Zara received a message from a major women's magazine asking to feature her story, single mother of twins, former flight attendant turned trainer, raising her children with grace after betrayal. She agreed, but only on her terms. No makeup artists, no glossy narratives, just her voice, her truth, and her babies in her lap. In the interview, she said softly but clearly, "I was betrayed, yes, but I was never broken. Women are not shadows of the men who leave them. We are light, even when we walk alone." The quote swept across social media like wildfire. Women reposted it. Journalists echoed it. Activists framed it. And Ethan? He watched it unfold from the quiet of his apartment, his laptop screen filled with her face, radiant, calm, unshaken. He didn't reach for the phone right away. He sat with the weight of her words. Then one evening he asked to meet. Not in a grand hotel, not in court, just in the park, near the sandbox where their boys now played with plastic shovels and bright red trucks. She arrived wearing jeans, a soft scarf wrapped around her hair, and a gaze that no longer flickered with hurt. He stood when she approached, nerves fraying at the edges. "I saw the interview," he said. "It was beautiful." "You were—" he trailed off, unsure whether he had the right to compliment her anymore. She simply nodded. "Thank you." The boys giggled in the background. Leaves danced on the wind between them. And after a long, full silence, he asked the question he'd held in his chest like a prayer. "Can we ever be a family?" Zara's eyes didn't fill with tears. Her lips didn't tremble. She didn't rush into sentiment or softness. Instead, she looked at him with the clarity of someone who had survived herself. "We already are," she said, "but not the way you think." His brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't explain. She didn't need to. She turned toward the boys, called out their names, and they came running, one on each side, clutching her fingers like roots to the earth. She smiled at Ethan, a soft, distant smile, kind but final. Then she walked away, not out of anger, not out of pride, but with the grace of a woman who had reclaimed her story, her strength, and her future. Behind her, the sunlight caught in the strands of her scarf, and for a brief second, Ethan saw her not as the woman he loved or the one he lost, but as something even greater, the woman she became when he let her fall. And she chose to rise anyway.